So once I've gotten the neck pickup down low enough, make sure you clip enough of the spring off that you have a little bit of clearance to go even deeper than you really need. If your springs are too long, it's going to hold the pickup up, and you won't be able to, you can only compress the spring so far before it bottoms out, and then you won't have any more adjustment. So it may take some trial and error how long to cut those springs. That all depends on how deep the route is, and every guitar is going to be a little bit different, so I can't give you an exact length to cut your springs to. Now I'm going to reinstall the bridge pickup. And again, I like the springs on most pickups because you can adjust how much microphonics you have depending on how much tension you have on that spring. If you want a little bit more microphonics, you clip your spring down a little bit so that the pickup is held a little bit looser into the guitar, so it vibrates a little bit more, and you'll get a little bit more microphonics. If you want less microphonics, you can just use a little longer spring. Occasionally, while we're talking about that, on Les Pauls in particular, the bridge pickup is up so high that it's almost sticking out of the route for the pickup, because the bridge is really high on these. So that pickup can be so high that it's just really flopping around in space. So that can make them too microphonic. So what I do is I take the foam out of the box, and I'll cut a piece of foam and fold it over and shove it underneath the pickup so that it adds additional pressure onto the pickup, so it's held in a little bit tighter. So if you are finding that you're getting a little bit too much microphonic and your bridge pickup is way up in the air, just put a little bit of foam under it, and that will usually cure it right there. Okay, so now I have that. I'm going to tighten my strings up just a little bit, just so they don't flop around and get in the way, fall off. Recently, the mini humbuckers are kind of making a comeback in popularity. The old Gibson ones really were only fair, actually. They tended to be overly bright and far too microphonic for to be usable. And I've addressed that when I designed these mini humbuckers. They're a little fatter sounding, a little more aggressive. They don't shriek at the drop of a hat like the old ones tended to. It's just a better, more usable pickup than the originals. So now I'm going to solder this back in. This guitar is wired up using the 57 Les Paul wiring, this schematic here. This is a stock Gibson schematic. The only difference is the capacitor to the tone control, the connection of the capacitor on the volume pot is moved over one lug to the center lug. And on the tone control, the capacitor's connection is moved over a lug to the outside lug that used to be grounded. So you can unsolder your ground lug, move your cap over on the tone pot, move the cap over on the volume pot, and you got the 57 Les Paul wiring. And what that does is it will give you a little bit more open overall tone when the volume and tone control is all the way up. So it's a subtle difference in that case. But when you roll the volume down, you retain much more high end than the stock wiring. So you don't lose quite as much treble. If you're using a good quality pickup and the quality of your guitar cable is good, you shouldn't be losing a whole lot of treble anyways. It should be almost unnoticeable. I don't recommend using a treble bypass cap, which is an extra capacitor that's wired to the volume control, because when you do roll your volume down on that, it's supposed to retain the treble better, but what it really does is it drops your bass off and you get more treble than you usually would. It's almost like having a bright switch on your amp. So it winds up sounding, the more volume you roll off on your volume control, the more treble-y of a sound you get. It becomes unnatural, especially as you get way down low. It can also leak when the volume is all the way up and the tone is all the way up. That treble bypass capacitor can affect the tone of the entire guitar by making it sound brighter with less bass. We get calls probably every other week, complaint that I just installed these pickups and it sounds funny. There's no bass, it doesn't have drive, it's really bright. And well, it turns out they put a treble bypass capacitor in at the same time, and as soon as you cut that off and get rid of it, the guitar sounds normal again. So I highly recommend the 57 Les Paul wiring. Works very good. We're going to get back to soldering here. I use a 40-watt chisel tip. This is a good soldering iron if you're used to soldering and you're really quick. If you're a beginner, you might want to go with a 20-watt pencil tip. It's much slower to heat. You're not going to burn anything up, but this will give you, soldering iron will give you a lot better quality joint, easier, in my opinion. So, I'm just going to follow the schematics. The other way you can do it is before you pull your old pickups out, it's a good idea to take a digital photograph of the control cavity, so if you do get lost, you can always revert back to whatever it was before you even got started. I am going to solder into the connection, the hot lead, onto the volume pot for the bridge pickup. That's old solder. I like to put a little bit of fresh solder on when I solder. I just put a little bit on, and it's a quick job. I'm done soldering. Don't let that 40 watts sit on there for a minute and a half. You can burn your pot up if you're on the back of the pot with that 40-watt iron. You let it sit on there for a minute or to 2 minutes. It'll heat the pot up so much that it can burn the resistive strip inside. That there's a little wiper that runs across the resistor. If you burn that, it'll bubble up the surface of the resistor and it'll become rough. And then you'll be able to tell that by when you turn the volume pot or tone pot, it'll feel like it has sand in it or grit, and it'll be really hard to turn. That means that you overheated your pot and you need to replace it. This is called pushback wire. This is our standard wire that we use. It's just like what Gibson used. So in order to solder this, you can either peel back the wire, peel back the casing. I use a little part of the tip for my ohm meter, and you can peel back that wire just a little bit at a time, a couple loops at a time. Take it, twist it with your finger. Now you have a lead wire for the ground, and because it's pushback wire, you push back this center conductor's insulator, and it will expose the inside wire. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it and this is how Gibson did it. You just push back the outside of the wire. Ta-da! There you go. There's a ground connection.